Good afternoon. You're watching AB Live, a news-based chat show in which we discuss topics ranging from news, business, politics, and so much more. After the previous session that we did on the UAE's job market, we did receive a lot of requests to talk about the Middle East and the Saudi's job market, which is why today in the studios we have Dominique and a lead from Michael Page. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, really nice to be here.
Great. So I'm going to begin with what Michael Page is and what exactly was the survey that was conducted recently.
So Michael Page is part of Page Group. Page Group is a multinational recruitment company listed on the London Stock Exchange. We're in over 38 countries, we have over 8,000 employees, and we've been in operation for approximately 43 years.
Oh wow.
Every quarter we do a survey asking our candidates what's on their mind, why they're looking to change jobs, what would they be looking for, what are they worried about. So that's what our Q1 and Q2 and Q3, Q4 results talk about.
Alright, great. So Dominique, you do deal with the Saudi market specifically. So if you had to give us an overview of how well or how bad the Saudi job market is doing right now, can you give us more details?
Yeah, sure. So I lead our Saudi practice for Page. Look, the Saudi market over the last couple of years has been extremely strong. Obviously, with the Crown Prince's transformation project and the Vision 2030, there's been a very high demand for talent across both across the government, semi-government, and now within the private sector also.
Right, so when you say that the job market is doing well, would you say that there is a demand for jobs in the market?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Yeah, we're seeing big demand, specifically when you look at the sort of the mid-senior end of the market. There is a huge demand for talent, and that's across both, looking at Saudi nationals and with expats as well.
Right, and if you had to give us a wider GCC perspective of the job market, a quick one.
Yeah, I think that's similar. If I sort of look at the last 10 years, we had the GFC happen where we had a sort of correction in the market. Then we had the Arab Spring uprising, which slowed things down a little bit. The big sort of change in the market was when we had the oil price collapse around 2015.
Yeah.
And I think that's when companies really had to take a step back and look at, how am I going to structure my organisation? How are we going to manage our costs? How are we going to drive our sales line? And I think that's been the thing that's really driven requirements from clients. And we've seen as a result of that, organisations across all sectors be active. I think it was the organisations that were quick to recognise the change are the ones that moved ahead. The ones that were a bit slow off the mark to not change, they're the ones that are behind the curve.
Right, so obviously the oil crisis wasn't great for the GCC and how the GCC was functioning in terms of the economy.
Sure,
But one thing that did happen was there was a GCC-wide diversification program that was launched in all of the countries. In Oman it was Tanfeed, in Saudi there's this entire entertainment drive happening.
Yeah.
So do you think that has sort of contributed, or perhaps the oil crisis was a much needed crisis for the GCC?
Look, if we look at the demand and obviously the transformations in the countries, the transformation and the changes in entertainment, in leisure, hospitality, there's been a huge increase in demand for talent. Yeah. So we've seen that have a massively positive impact on the market.
Right.
And look, I would add to that, it wasn't just the oil price that we had to deal with as a business community in the last 4 years. We've had the introduction of VAT, specifically in the UAE, that'll be rolled out to the other GCC countries. We've had an e-commerce revolution, so consumers' buying behaviours have changed a lot, and that's meant retailers and local groups have had to change how they operate. You've also got the sugar tax that was implemented, which has impacted a lot of the FMCG companies, tobacco tax, really strong US dollar. So many things have happened in the last 4 or 5 years that this region's never had to deal with. So organisations have had to think completely different, and as I mentioned earlier, the smart organisations have realised that, have looked at their structure, have changed their structure, and as a result of that have been hiring right across the board.
Alright, great. So another reason why we would expect a lot of hiring to happen right now is because of the major project announcements that we've seen, especially from Saudi Arabia, be it Qiddiya, Neom, and of course the major refineries that are happening. So would you say that right now there is a huge demand, or the demand surge is going to be seen in the coming few years?
Oh, look, we've been seeing the demand for the past over 12 months. In fact, for the last 2 years. When we look at the giga projects, these kicked off in 2018. So we've seen the demand for the last 2017, yes, for the last 2 years. So and we see this demand continuing. There's still a huge demand for top talent. And again, if you, as I said earlier, looking at sort of expats within specific skill sets, and there's a high demand for Saudi nationals as well.
Right. All right. So I am going to get to Saudization in a bit, but before that, it's just that you said that the projects were announced or launched in 2017, but then last year in 2018, we did see a mass exodus of expatriates from Saudi. Nearly 1.3 million people left the country. So why was that? So when there is demand, there is supply, but for some reason the gap isn't being bridged.
Sure. So there were departures from the kingdom last year. The majority of that were from a lower socio sort of demographic perspective, as the country looked to, reorganise itself, making decisions based on the 2030 plan, taking into account the oil price reduction, and I think now what's come out of that is there is more opportunities for Saudi nationals, which is fantastic. And again, not just for Saudi national males, but we're seeing a much bigger increase for the demand of female Saudi nationals as well. But I think organisations are a lot clearer on the technical skill set that they want, and also the salary packages that they're prepared to pay. I think historically there used to be a bit of a premium to go to Saudi Arabia. It was seen as a hardship posting, but that's certainly not the case anymore.
Right. So now speaking of Saudization, just quickly, I want to know what your opinion of that is, of having a reservation system essentially when it comes to nationals of a country. I'll start with you, Dominic.
Yeah, look, there is a huge population over in Saudi. You've got 20 million Saudi nationals. So there's a big talent pool, and so it's key getting the Saudi nationals into the key positions. So we've seen very positive demand by the government, semi-government, a lot of the giga projects to recruit Saudi nationals into key positions.
And look, I think it's part of all of our role as expatriates that have come from developed markets to play a part in improving where we can parts of the region. So it's all about knowledge transfer, and that's what we've been doing for the last 10 years, is looking at how we can build organisations from a knowledge transfer perspective. And I think it's fantastic having a nationalisation programs that each of the different GCC countries, and to Dom's point, Saudi Arabia is a huge country with a huge population, with a large percentage of Saudi nationals. So it's all about how do they diversify the offerings for Saudi nationals, not just from a work point of view, but also from an education point of view.
Right.
And I'm very pleased to say that the thinking behind that and the implementation is very far down the road, and it's a big part of our job is actually recruiting Saudi nationals at all the different levels across the government, semi-government and private sector.
Right, so another phenomenon that we've seen in the last few years is the return of the Saudis, those who've left the country to go abroad and study, etc.
Yeah.
They are coming back right now. Why do you think that is happening?
Because of the 2030 vision. Yeah, because of the transformation of the country. They want to be involved. They want to be a part of it. And so they're keen to come back, and that's one of the things that we are targeting. We are looking at Saudis globally, so looking at Saudis in the UK, in the US, in Australia, around the world, to discuss opportunities within the kingdom.
Right. So would you say that all of these programs, the nationalisation programs, etc., isn't great news for the expats residing there then?
Both Saudi nationals and expats have an important role to play. So there's a huge pipeline of talent of Saudi nationals coming through at the different levels. We need expats to develop skill sets in certain areas. So for example, and we were talking about this earlier, the tourism sector. The tourism sector is a big part of the 2030 vision. The tourism sector is more advanced in other countries around the world. So how do you actually lift that up? You bring those skills from around the world, top talent, you then partner that with some of the best and brightest Saudi nationals, you do the knowledge transfer, then I foresee a period in perhaps 5 to 10 years' time where expatriates aren't needed in sectors like that.
Right, so speaking of sectors, what are the main sectors right now in Saudi Arabia and in the wider GCC where there is a demand coming from?
Yeah, so the key sectors in Saudi right now it's with the semi-government and the giga projects, and specifically when you look at real estate and financial services. They would be the key sectors in Saudi at the moment.
In Saudi, and how about in the GCC?
Look, broader GCC, government spending is outpacing the private sector spending. So you've got major civil projects going on. A lot of this has to do around power. So how can the Middle East maintain or improve the not just the volume but the efficiency of that. So we're seeing a lot of investment across all the different GCC countries, specifically in power, and I refer to solar in particular, looking at wind as well.
All right, now you did mention about the public and private sector. Traditionally, we've seen that most of the people in the GCC, especially nationals in these countries, have sort of had an inclination towards the public sector. But right now, the private sector is trying to attract most of that workforce and the manpower. How do you think they can do it in the right way?
Yeah, look, in Saudi, there's a lot of the multinationals are attracting Saudi nationals. And how do they do it in the right way? It's offering a career. And so again, it's like Leif was saying earlier. When they're working with top expatriates, the opportunity to not just work in Saudi but to work with people around the world to develop that knowledge. And I think that's one of the ways that you're looking at the multinationals, and whether that's within looking at FMCG, pharmaceutical, the management consultancies, energy. That's where they're all looking to attract top local talent.
If I can add something to that, what the private sector were very good at, particularly in Saudi and the broader GCC, but especially in Saudi, is very strong learning and development programs, and investing heavily in that. So putting their high potential employees, which typically in a large scale organisation might be your top 5%, putting them in very structured talent development programs stretching from sort of 1 to 3 years, and part of that might be rotating across an organisation, or it might even be further studies in Riyadh or Jeddah, or if they're very lucky, perhaps going off to London to do an MBA, or France or Spain. So to their credit, a lot of the local Saudi companies, particularly in the energy sector, have been extremely proactive, to the point where we've got other multinationals from around the world asking us to tell them about how do the Saudi organisations develop their pipeline of talent.
Right, but how exactly are they going to compete with all the benefits that the private sector provides right now? Some of them being shorter working hours, higher salaries, and of course the other advantages including gratuity, etc. All of this, especially for the locals. Well,
it's an excellent question, and it, like everything, it goes in cycles. So right now in Saudi, we're probably 2 years into a big purge of talent out of the private sector into the public sector. So the 2030 vision has meant the public sector has needed to transform. To do that, they've needed skills out of the private sector. So you've had top talent coming out of the private sector, implementing change, getting results. So it's kind of been the other way around, actually. It's been how does the public sector attract people out of the private sector? And for a lot of Saudi nationals, one, it's the pride of being part of the 2030 vision and taking some of the best practice skills and experience they've got out of the private sector and putting that into the public sector. Two is the career curve. Being able to be involved in implementing so much change is very rare, because one of the frustrations you find in the private sector, especially with multinationals, is that you have a global strategy that needs to be implemented locally. So there's not a lot that you can do to change locally. So actually what we see is that we've got candidates from the private sector coming to us saying, hey, I want to be a part of what's going on in the public sector. Now we expect at some stage that to swing back the other way. And obviously that's what keeps us very busy. All right,
great. Do you also see this move happening in the other parts of the GCC?
Look, not as much. Saudi has 28 million people as a country, of which we've said roughly 21 million are Saudi nationals. So the scale and the pace of what they're doing isn't really matched in the other GCC countries. Certainly, the other GCC locations are active, and government spending is significant in driving a lot of those economies. But the scale and pace of what's happening in Saudi is quite different to the rest of the GCC.
All right, great. So something that we heard over the weekend was the guardianship system and the amendment to the guardianship system. I think everyone is very, very excited about that. But one of the amendments that was made in that was protection to female employees in the workplace and against discrimination. So do you think all of these different reforms that we've been seeing in Saudi, including the lift of the ban on driving, guardianship system, etc., is going to attract more female employees, and how exactly is this going to monetarily benefit the economy?
Yeah, look, Leif and I have both been out here in the region for 10 years, and we've both been recruiting across UAE and Saudi. Over the last couple of years, we've seen a huge change in the kingdom, and the way of life, and you go even going into the restaurants, everything's changed. It's changed quite tremendously. So what we're seeing in the workplace, the demand, the request isn't based on gender. It's based on finding the best person for the role. So it doesn't matter whether they're male or female. So we're seeing it have a huge positive change.
But
in the
again, youth female unemployment stands at 58%.
Sure.
But youth unemployment is much lower when you talk about within the male category. Do you think these rules are going to change that?
100% is changing, and we can see it. So, to reference Dom's point, the first time I went to the Kingdom was back in 2009. I mean, as a business, we've been recruiting and doing business, and the pace of change in the last 2 years is significant. So, we're dealing with female Saudis in very senior positions, and you will see. While Dom is absolutely correct, the requirement at the end of the day is to find the candidate that both technically and from a company culture point of view is the best match. I think if you ask clients separately, would you like more Saudi national females in your business, they would say yes.
All right.
And the good news is that with a fantastic education system over there, it's coming.
Right.
The pipeline of talent is coming.
All right, that's obviously really great to hear. Another thing that I read in your survey was 79% of the people think that the job market is going to improve in the near future. When exactly is this future?
Look, if I talk Middle East specifically, it has improved, and it's continuing to improve. If I go back to what I said earlier, all of those things that happen in that short 2-3 year time frame shocked everyone. B2C, B2B, and the government. It was a huge shock. It never ever happened before. But it was a good shock because it forced everyone in the government and in the private sector to think differently. And while yes, there will have been changes of headcount in a lot of organisations, both public and sector and private sector, they've now worked out what they need.
Right.
And so there have been more jobs coming to the market, particularly this year. I mean, for our own business, we're one of the largest recruitment companies in the region. We had an all-time record year last year.
Right.
This year, we're double-digit figures up on last year. So as we like to think we're a good yardstick of the regional activity, and we feel like we're out of the worst of it. With a caveat on that, the Middle East region, there's always going to be some challenges thrown along the way, but the main thing is trying to think ahead of the curve and make good decisions quickly. And again, I put it back to my first comment. The organisations that reacted quickly and had a plan and implemented are the ones that are still hiring today.
Right, so I'm just gonna, I'd asked this when I'd done the interview about the UAE's job market as well, that we do see all of these ads going out that we need 100 jobs, 500 jobs, 5,000 jobs, etc. But are all of these seats being filled, and also are these seats being filled locally from the manpower that's available right now here in the region?
Look, it's mixed. So again, at the lower level, particularly if you're talking about staff to say sort of working in hotels or in call centres, you might see, or on construction sites, there's still a lot of bringing those skills in from other countries around the world.
Yeah.
I think once you start to look at white collar professionals, so degree qualified, that 2 to 3 years experience, there's enough really good talent on the ground here already. So you're less likely to need to go international to bring those skills in. That is unless that it's a particular sector where the skills don't exist, and a good example of that would be digital.
Right.
So part of that e-commerce revolution that I mentioned before, and how we as consumers behave, digital's been an area that is revolutionising the B2B and the B2C side, but the skills haven't been here to change the business. So that is one area in the last 1 to 2 years where you need to pull people out of different markets.
Right, so perhaps we're not going to be seeing as many redundancies that we saw in the last few years then?
I hope not. As I said, I think the last 3 years there have been changes to the market which most people wouldn't have seen coming. I'd like to think that we can't, that we won't see any more coming in the future. But as I said earlier, this region can be a little bit unpredictable at times, but certainly the possibilities and the opportunities far outweigh any of the challenges that are there.
Great. So what are the major trends we're seeing, especially in the Saudi market?
So there's still the trends continue within the real estate space. Still a big demand for talent there. If I look at financial services, specifically within middle office, looking at candidates that've got experience within governance, risk and compliance.
Okay.
We're getting a big demand for candidates within that space. And then look, as I said earlier, within the sort of semi-government giga projects, big demand in those spaces for Saudi nationals, specifically across the corporate support services space.
All right, great. And is there anything you'd like to add with regards to the GCC trends that we've seen?
Within the GCC, all industry verticals have some level of activity. So there's not necessarily one industry vertical across the broader GCC that's outpacing another.
Okay.
And that's because a lot of the key locations are already pretty well developed. So it gets back to earlier points of if it's a sector where there's government funding, then for example in Abu Dhabi in October last year we saw a huge amount of money ran to the market aimed at healthcare, tourism, technology, education. So if you're talking about Abu Dhabi, those particular sectors are improving. Clearly we've got Expo 2020 that'll start in a bit over 12 months' time. So anything related to that, we're seeing a little bit of activity there as well. So I can't really say broader GCC there's a particular area of growth outpacement or the other. It's more about you've got to look into the different industry verticals, find out where the investment's coming from, if it's the government sector or the private sector, find out which companies then are involved in those projects, and then that's where the work is.
Right, and finally my last question is what needs to change or what more needs to be done to improve the recruitment processes here in the GCC? It could be with regards to time, could be with regards to expectations. What would your quick tips be?
Look, I suppose one is the processes, because candidates are very much bought into the recruitment process and the journey. So what's very important is to make sure that they have a very seamless and enjoyable journey from the day they're spoken to about the opportunity to the interview, through the interview processes to the offer management.
Which is long right now.
Yeah, look, it can take, the process is, dependent upon the level of the role, can take anywhere from 2 to 3 months.
Right.
So, so it's important that throughout that process that the buy-in is maintained and the journey is a good journey for the candidates.
One of the biggest things I've seen change in the 10 years I've been here is risk appetite. Candidates are more risk adverse, clients are more risk adverse. So when you've got a candidate and client who are both more risk adverse for good reasons, they're probably going to ask more questions. You might have an extra stage in the process. I believe that means that candidates and clients make a better decision at the end of that process. So I certainly think that the risk appetite has changed. Candidates no longer are looking to move purely on salary alone. They want career stability, they want long-term career growth. Company culture is becoming even more important. Like, what else do you offer? Do you have days where people can work from home? What kind of corporate social responsibility initiatives do you have on a quarterly or an annual basis?
Right.
How do you celebrate some of the small successes in the office as well? So the market's changed, the region's changed, candidates' perception and their decision-making matrix has changed, and the final point that I would leave it on is we now have 75% of our candidates telling us that they intend to be here for 5 years or more. 35% are saying they're going to be here for 10 years or more.
Oh, wow.
That would not have happened 5 years ago before that.
Right.
So we're seeing that not only the region changing, but candidates' expectations and what they want are changing as well. And organisations need to be really aware of that, because it could be the difference between attracting the right people and keeping the right people as well.
Right, great. Thank you so much for those great insights. We know more about the Saudi job market right now. And thank you for watching AB Live. We will be back again next Tuesday.